All right. Good afternoon and welcome to this week's Iowa Learning Farm Conservation Webinar. I'm Matt Helmers with Iowa State University and happy to be on to host the webinar again today. This week, we are fortunate to have Dr. Jacqueline Comito, that's an anthropologist at Iowa State University and works with the Iowa Learning Farms, Water Rocks, and helps with, works on a number of other research projects here at Iowa State. And today she's going to talk about water issues in Iowa, thinking about that urban-rural divide and that revisited. And this comes out of a lot of work that was done last winter with various listening sessions, R&R's rapid need and response workshops, 4 of those that were done throughout the state, as well as student surveys. So this is work that Jackie was involved with, but many of us also had the opportunity to participate in some of these events and hear about it, or hear some of the feedback and some of the questions, concerns, issues that were raised by stakeholders. So I think it's always important for us to think about, some of these issues and where there are questions, comments, and concerns, and think about those as we move forward in trying to increase conservation on the land. So fortunate to have Dr. Comito here today to summarize those efforts and some of the findings that she's taken away from that work. As always, if you have questions, feel free to type those in the chat box and we'll get those to Dr. Comito at the end of her talk. And with that, Jackie, the virtual floor is all yours.
Okay, so before I start, Okay. Yeah, before I start, I want to give a shout out to Nathan Stevenson and Ann Stout, who, if this presentation is visually beautiful, it is all because of their efforts and their skill set. So thank you to them. And the report itself, those two played a huge role in making it a very accessible report and a very readable report. So to what extent do Iowans care about the quality of the water in our state? And that was the question I was asking. It's actually a question I've been asking for years. We thought we would ask it again this go around, just to see if we could get a good sense of have things changed and what's going on. So let's dig in. And before I even go a little farther, let me just emphasize that this is a part of I'm only sharing you like certain parts of the report because it's a rather lengthy report and there's a lot of data. Also, the methods, the survey, and then the demographic material is at the end of that report. So if you're curious about how our demographics work out, please check out the report that you can find at the Conservation Learning Group, and I'm sure somebody's just put it in the chat. All right, so the goals was to capture a snapshot of the current attitudes and then to compare that to studies that have been done from 10 years, 15 years ago. We wanted to get a broad spectrum of Iowans, but we weren't necessarily trying to represent the whole state of Iowa. I didn't survey that way, so I cannot say in any way, shape, or form that this sample is representative of all Iowans. But I can say that it's got some strong voices from college students, from farmers, and some of the non-farmer rural residents, and then rural and urban residents in some of our townships. And that's kind of how I also looked at the data. We sent out this water issues in Iowa survey. We sent it out via mail using the Iowa Learning Farms mailing list, as well as sample surveying from plat maps that we had entered in from across the state. And then we also had several of our partnering organizations email it out. So you could either respond to the survey electronically or you could do the paper survey. And then we also were able to send that to the 3 Regent universities. We had some partners over at the other 2 universities who were really great in helping us get that to all the students. In addition to that, we did on-campus interviews with 60 students on the 3 Regent universities. And we also did 6 listening sessions, 3 rural, 3 urban, and had 47 participants. So, what's changed over the last decade since I did the Water Quality Matters to Us All report? Well, media coverage of water issues has increased. Outreach and education on water quality has significantly increased. And the funding to encourage reduced agricultural nutrient loads has significantly increased in the state. But when we look at the survey data, all age and social groups are only slightly more aware of water quality issues and causes than in previous surveys. And it seems that the awareness of the problem has not released an outpouring of action per se. With one codicil, those people who are heavily involved and really paying attention would like to see more action. But I would say the vast majority of the people in the state of Iowa are still not really paying attention to this. So how's the water according to those people who did respond to our survey? So drinking water, 87% of the general public respondents view their drinking water as safe, and 74% of the college students view their drinking water as safe. Now, on the general public, this tells you, the demographics of our sample. A big chunk of those people actually had well water. Over half, or nearly half, of the general public respondents rely on well water. And we know from a different research project that I was involved in that private well water users generally believe their wells are safe, but less than 10% test their wells on a yearly basis. So whether you think your wells are safe and your wells are safe, your drinking water, is something that obviously is of great public concern. How's the groundwater? Those who farm have more confidence in the quality of groundwater today than a decade ago. Those who don't farm have less confidence in the quality of groundwater compared to a decade ago. Surface water. 71% of the general public view their surface water quality as fair or poor. 73% of the students who responded also viewed their surface water quality as fair and poor, or fair or poor. When we asked them to identify the primary conditions impacting water quality, hardness was one of the leading answers, along with fertilizers, nitrate, livestock waste, pesticides, and high bacteria count. Now, hardness is directly a response to the water coming out of the tap. The other ones, so when we asked them that question, obviously if they said hardness, they were mixing what's coming out of their tap versus what's running in the rivers, lakes, streams. Who should fix our water quality problem? And that depends on who you ask. Those who farm tend to lean on individuals to protect water quality, as this quote from this male farmer was. He'd say, it'd be nice if it was grassroots, farmers feeling compelled or feeling responsible themselves. Those who aren't engaged in farming, as well as a majority of the students, put higher responsibility on government. Here's a female urban listening session participant. Government has to be supportive, and they're the only ones that are subsidizing a lot of these problems. They're encouraging higher production, really pushing really high numbers and intensive farming. Both urban and farmer participants pointed toward crop insurance and government programs as contributing to poor water quality. Here's from a farmer. If the crop insurance wasn't the way it was, that land wouldn't be farmed. It'd be put back into pasture. And this leads me to something that we've heard through the decades is the blame game. Oops, sorry about that. This is from a female farmer. I want the quality of my water that we drink and use in our home protected, and that we give to our livestock protected. I guess under our philosophy of personal rights and freedoms, you're welcome to pollute your land all you want. But the minute your pollution leaves your land and starts impacting other people's quality of life, there's usually a regulatory barrier to prevent you from doing that. That's from one of our male participants. There's a safe way to do agriculture and unsafe ways. And I'm assuming we do very unsafe practices with pesticides, runoff, going into local water streams. A female student. A male farmer. I'm not incentivized to leave the farm, to stick my neck out, to talk to anybody about this. You just get yelled at. female urban. I think farmers get tired of being blamed for all our ills. And I think that people don't always want to be blamed, don't always want to blame the farmers for what's going on. A male farmer. You can't just blame farmers. I think there are other polluters besides just farmers. So, and there's a lot more. The report goes into this a little bit more. And so when we think about the blame game between our urban and our rural and our farmer residents in the state, one of the questions I said to farmers, when you think about how the nutrient reduction strategy clearly puts our water quality challenges on the doorstep of agriculture, urban plays a small role, but if all the urban went away, we still would have some serious issues in the state. With that being true, I asked our farmers right out, how can we talk about water quality without making it sound like we're blaming farmers? And I asked that question sincerely. One of the strengths of being both a researcher and an extension professional is that part of why I'm doing the research is so that I can do extension better. And I would love to have greater insight on how we do this, because part of being able to change things is be able to take responsibility. So I was just curious, how can I do this that wouldn't sound like I was blaming farmers? And honestly, when I posed that question in all 3 of the farmer listening sessions, they thought about it, and no one could actually come up with a way I could do that. So let's look at this rural-urban divide and see how it's manifesting itself today, and see how first I want to look at how it manifested itself 11 years ago. This is from the Water Quality Matters to Us All report that was published in 2011. One of the greatest impediments to improving water quality is the absconding of responsibility by one sector of the populace by pointing the finger at another. We must foster a sense of collective responsibility for water pollution. It is time that we stop using the urban-rural divide in Iowa as an excuse not to act on water quality issues. After 10 years, this dynamic is still in effect. The conversations and the ability to move forward toward solutions, it's impacting us. It's still there, and it's still brought up. There's still this understanding that one side doesn't understand the other side. So this time before I did the listening sessions, I thought to myself, I want to find out who are these urban people, at least the people showing up to have these discussions. 42% of the participants in the urban listening sessions are connected to farming. Either they actually owned a farm with siblings, or it's in their family history. Their father or their grandfather or grandmother farmed. And I would say, I can say this with great assurance, not one urban participant in the listening sessions thought that the farmers were polluting the waters intentionally. This is from one of the urban respondents. Those farmers who do the right thing are putting themselves at an economic disadvantage because the ones that don't are saving money. So urban people actually emphasize that doing conservation and water quality practices could bring with it economic challenges and put them, as she said, at an economic disadvantage. Urban people emphasize with the economic challenges. If I'm a farmer and I plant cover crops and my neighbor doesn't, or if I plant
Buffers.
That has got to be a typo.
Yeah, okay.
Anyway, buffers, that should be 2 Fs. Buffers along the stream. Yeah, that's just one of those funny typos, right? If I plant along the stream that runs through my property, but my neighbor doesn't, that's an uneven playing field. We need government to level the playing field for farmers. So this is, again, an urban person saying, we get it. The farmer does some of these things like cover crops. And in fact, there's a recent study out of Purdue that's telling us that farmers are backing off of cover crops. Got to be the cost. Also has to be probably some of the droughty conditions that we've been experiencing. So, urban people kind of get this is not easy. Here's from a farmer where she said, I think until we can penalize farmers for doing things that they shouldn't be doing and actually make it hurt in their pocketbook, you're probably not going to change them. So farmers agree that some farmers need to do better. Okay, whoops. Here's from another urban person. The nutrient reduction plan is a joke. To reach the goals and and I think when he says goals, I think the plan, actually their scenarios, but to reach those goals, of wetlands is going to take 942 years. This person called that gaslighting and is concerned that people think something is actually working and it's not. Farmers are also frustrated if we're actually moving toward improvement. From their perspective, they've been hearing this. And one guy talked about when he was in grade school, and they've been hearing this for so many years and he just wanted to know what was the benchmark on participation filter strips. Have we actually improved? What was it 30 years ago? Where are we at today? And they're frustrated because they feel like they're not getting any credit for what has happened, or even knowing how far they need to go. Somebody from the urban hangs, and whenever, just because I feel like I'm obligated to not drop comments that take Iowa State to task, but this person said that Iowa State needs to be more clear in terms of what some of the real impacts are. I think a lot of the public thinks it's getting better. They don't understand because of the ads that are being run that show how great it is. There's a huge propaganda campaign. And this person, along with a few others, mentioned football games, basketball games, those arenas where a lot of Iowans from across the state come together, like at University of Iowa and Iowa State. So Iowans, so if I look at the rural-urban divide, I would say one of the collective thing that we all share is we're frustrated and we're a little angry. We don't really have an idea to move forward with solutions toward healthier water. I would say we know the practices that can do it. I think we know the science of it. I think when they say no idea how, when I write this, they don't know how socially, economically to move forward. And they all seem to agree that a more honest dialogue about the current condition of water is vital. So one of the urban people actually said to me after the listening session was over, what would happen if we bring farmers and urban residents together in the same listening session? And I don't know. I've actually never done it other than like to an urban session. If somebody actually has, is a farmer, but now lives in the urban area, I've had that a little bit. I've never done that. So, I think that's a great question and maybe worth exploring. One of the things they also seem to agree with is that we have to have a new way of telling the story. It's like we keep saying the same thing over and over again. We keep having the same arguments. 10 years later, we're still saying, oh, those urban people don't understand. And some of the urban people are saying, oh, those farmers, they're the problem. They just need to do it. It's easy. They just need to do things differently. I was really struck by this quote. This was a young woman at this urban listening session. If I'm not, she was no longer a student, but she wasn't that far from being a student. And the listening session actually gave her hope. She came in thinking that nothing was possible. After we had finished like the more formal questions I needed to ask and have them answer, they asked me about what I was hearing from farmers, and I started to share with them what I'd been hearing from farmers. And this is when she said that she was drawn to this idea of changing the story. That's her background as a communication specialist. And she thinks that we need to look for those narratives, those stories that will start to shift something, to help convince, to help persuade, to help excite them. And so she says, and so I'm very hopeful about some of the ideas you have around changing the language, shifting the story. And I think another thing I saw tonight is I was ready to accept a gridlock or two sides not having any common ground, when I think we do share the value of wanting healthy water. I think anyone can get behind that. It's not like farmers don't want healthy water. It's just finding a way, a path toward that. I hope we can do. And to me, I think she says it better than anything I could say, is can we start a urban rural listening session where we start with that comment of, okay, let's start on the idea that we all want healthy water. And then ask the question, how do we do that? How do we find a path toward that? A path that we can all embrace. So I think the question is, does water quality matter to us all? I asked it 12 years ago. I ask it again, and I'm not always sure I know the answer to that question, and I'm not presuming to know the answer. The whole point of this research was to give voice to voices we don't hear very often, and is maybe to, you know, maybe to move forward past some of the arguments we hear repeatedly. The urgency to improve water quality. I said this 12 years ago. I will say it again. The urgency to improve water quality in Iowa will not significantly increase without clear, consistent, and pervasive messaging. I would say that the urban people can handle being told that the number of practices we would need to make a huge difference is astronomically high. We need a lot of wetlands. We need a lot of bioreactors. We need a lot of saturated buffers. We need cover crops out there. We need everything. And I think urban people can handle that, because the question I ask the urban people is, how are we going to pay for this? How do you see this being paid for? This is a significant economic investment that we're asking of our state. And quite honestly, the state itself, our state government, doesn't have the money to do that. Individual farmers would struggle to do that. Federal government needs to step in. And let's face it, we don't do this without our agricultural corporations stepping in and making a clear investment in this. So until we can get that, and I think we can be honest, and I think farmers would also appreciate that honesty, that this is hard. What we're being asked to do is difficult. It's hard to make ends meet sometimes as it is, especially when we've been swinging from flooding to drought now. In the 18 years that I've been doing this job, we've had a number of floods and we've had a number of droughts. And then we have derechos that significantly damage things. So we're facing a lot of challenges in the state environmentally. I end all my presentations with this quote from the Lorax: unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. So I guess what I'm calling for is, let's just have as open and as interesting of a discussion as we can. We're not all going to agree. I'm not out for agreement. I'm out for ideas. And let's see where we go. And now I'll give Matt his slides.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. Get your questions in while Jackie takes a drink of water. If you need a CCA CEU, please email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW, at iastate.edu by Wednesday, October 18th at 5 p.m. Enter your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. Again, ALENAW at iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today. Let's go to the next slide, Jackie.
Yes, doing
which
it.
is our demographic survey. If you watch this webinar live and you're willing to fill out a voluntary demographic survey, you can go to iowalearningfarms.org/survey or scan the QR code and enter that. And if you filled one out for 2023, thank you so much. You don't need to do another one. And we're going by calendar year 2023. I don't know if that's federal fiscal year, but we're going calendar 2023. So if you filled one out for 2023, thank you so much. If you're willing to do it, that would be awesome. And let's plug, there we go. Okay, we got something a little different. You know, you never know what you're going to get with Iowa Learning Farms Conservation Webinar. So next week we have Christine Eccles, the Chief Engagement Officer at the Blank Park Zoo, talking about taking action for pollinators. So, you know, the last 2 weeks you had to listen to something about drainage. Today we got thinking about water quality in Iowa and how we can all think about this differently from the urban rural. And next week it's pollinators. Okay, with that we got a couple questions in. So
am I going to stop sharing?
Sure. Yeah, I think you can stop sharing, because then we can see a big screen. Okay. Could you describe what you think might be the ideal format for some of those future rural urban conservations around water quality?
Wow, the ideal. Well, one of the things one of the really interesting things we do with our Iowa Learning farmer partners is that every other year, we bring them together in like February, and we do this leadership circle where it is kind of, we throw out questions and we have a discussion and a dialogue. And there's usually there's anywhere from 25 to 30 of them who show up. And we talk about a variety of topics because it helps us with our future program planning behind the farmers or the state agencies who fund us, some of the researchers from Iowa State, and a few other invited guests. And their job is to just listen. We are there to listen and to the farmers. So maybe that format, if you add some urban people into it, maybe it's half of those Iowa Learning Farmer partners who are open-minded, would probably, but would still be interested in having this kind of conversation. Maybe we start there, or maybe a similar format to that, where it's not about performing for those of us who they think we want to hear a certain thing. It's about having honest, true dialogue. You do need a moderator. You're going to need a moderator just to make sure, because sometimes we get long-winded. Sometimes our farmers get long-winded, just to make sure that we're giving adequate time for everybody. And then we lay some ground rules. Can we talk about this without doing it? Let's challenge ourselves to not blame anyone. Instead, ask questions. Let's ask questions of each other.
Yeah. Okay. A question. So you surveyed the students as well. Did you see any kind of differences in the students' perception on kind of whose responsibility some of this is than?
Yeah, that's where they really deviated from the general population. Students still believe that government can make a difference. When it comes to water quality, when we asked them about climate change in person, those 60 students, they actually threw corporations in there too. They're like, we're not doing the climate change issue without corporate help. So they put corporations equally responsible as governments.
Did you find any growing support among the ag audience for stronger policies to protect water quality?
That's an interesting question. And I'd say through my if you're asking me the question from this most recent database, I would say of the listening sessions, no, there was a lot of kind of doubling down on issues. They were kind of tired of hearing about water quality. But if you talk about over the 17, 18 years I've been doing this job, it's ebbed and flowed. Like I could be in southern Iowa, and when the Des Moines Water Works lawsuit was happening, and I know this shocks people, but the farmers down there were not upset about that lawsuit. They saw it as maybe the means of getting some of their friends to the north, their farmer colleagues to the north, to do something differently. So, I remember being in a few different listening sessions and they weren't upset. I'd say the one listening session, we had one in the southeast section just this past thing. We also did some R&R. We did one R&R over there. They're interesting because they're still very slopey land, and they felt like crop insurance needed to change. If you changed crop insurance, you'd get better water quality impacts, because people would stop farming land that should just be in pasture, and they also might take better care of their pastures. So both twofold. So they went on about crop insurance quite a bit down in the southeast.
Yeah, I still remember when the next day you called me and told me about that one. That was yeah. No, that was not the one I went to.
No, but it was also over in the southeast. Was it?
Yeah.
Weren't we over there at least?
We were at Ottumwa for an R&R.
Where he just didn't want to hear. Stop talking about water quality.
Yeah,
they did not want to talk about.
They did not,
quality.
And that was even among that. That was really surprising. Sorry for me to interject something, but that was really surprising because that was a group of farmers who almost all were doing cover crops and still didn't. They really were kind of tired of talking about water quality. Okay.
And honestly, I'm going to say, urban people are also a little tired of talking about water quality too, but doesn't mean we don't have to do it. Doesn't mean we.
That's right. I mean, we have a job because we have to keep doing it, right?
Yes.
We get to, Okay. All right. Here's one. how does this a challenging one? We get to put it on. Yeah, how does a person start that one-on-one conversation with a farmer that, maybe thinks they're a good steward of the land, but has some real opportunities for improvement that they may have, quite a bit of soil um, uh, leaving their land.
Okay, so I'm looking around my desk to see if there's this book. Yes. So there is this book that I'm going to suggest you read, because all I would be doing is probably quoting it. It's called How Minds Change. Here we go. I'm plugging a book. How Minds Change, and that my
Your virtual, yeah, your virtual blurry
doesn't work,
background.
but
Okay.
actually, How Minds Change. And one of the things they call them change conversations. And you can't, no amount of dumping facts on anybody is going to get them to change their mind. Now you can walk around their farm if they want to, if they're willing to, they could walk around. You could walk around the farm with them. You could ask them questions. You could actually ask them questions. You got to find some commonality. So if you're somebody, like, I don't know who asked this question, but if you're somebody who is a farmer yourself, you could talk about some of the challenges you have had to try to gain rapport. And then through a series of questions, maybe you bring that person around to seeing that perhaps they could do something different. And I bet I've got some NRCS people out there who have done exactly that without knowing this book or knowing this process, knows that you sometimes bring people around by sharing your own story and then letting them talk. And if they talk long enough, they might see, hey, yeah, maybe I want to. But if you go in saying, this is bad and it needs to change, that person is going to just stop listening to you. And that's what's happening in our country on every issue right now.
Yeah, not this.
Stop calling people stupid on both sides. Let's stop thinking that the other person doesn't know anything. And let's just trust that they can be reasonable.
Yeah. Okay. Can you say the name of that book again, Jackie? I'm going to try
Yeah,
to type it.
it's How Minds Change.
How
David
Minds
McRaney.
Change.
MC
Okay.
small c r
Oh
a.
God.
Sorry,
David.
was that
David
David McRaney?
Okay. MC.
McRaney. How Minds Change.
Okay. Okay. Great. Here's one good one. Is it time for a rebrand of water quality?
Oh, definitely. That's actually in the listening session that spurred that great comment that I really loved. I was actually saying, how would this change if we went from saying water quality to saying water health, like soil health? Soil health. Boy, that really changed farmers' way of looking at their soil, right? And obviously, we still got work to do on that, but I think they understand health. We understand health. We understand health as a complete organic thing, right? Like if I am diagnosed with cancer, I can't just try to get rid of the cancer. I also have to make sure my whole body remains healthy in order for my immune system to do what it needs to do. The same would be true of our water bodies. They are a whole system that it isn't just about making sure nitrates don't get in there. There's a whole lot of other things need to happen. I'm going to plug Matt can probably give you the reference to this. There's some really great research being done on rivers. The person came and spoke at both the water conference and then at Iowa State about the monitoring they're doing on rivers. And, we're learning all sorts of things that even before you look at the pollutants that are getting into the rivers are being impacted by climate change. So I think we have to look at it from a health perspective, which is going to have us not siloing individual issues. Does that make sense? So I think talking about water health instead of water quality. I also think we have to understand the one dynamic I didn't bring up in the urban-rural divide is when an urban person, from what I was listening and seeing and from my own experience, those who do recreate on water bodies, whether it's kayaking or fishing or boating of any kind, they see water in the state as a part of their quality of life. They see it as recreation. They see it almost in spiritual terms, their connection to water. When a farmer looks at a water body, when he thinks of water, when he thinks of rain, when he thinks of, it's a commodity that has to be managed. And that's how they've been doing it. So I think we have to understand those two different perspectives and maybe even put it out there. Because then maybe if you've got a group of urban and rural, a farmer could say, you know what, I actually like to fish too. and we could begin to get those values that they share. So, and we also, I think in general, and this is probably globally, we have got to stop seeing our natural resources as something to be managed and something to maybe work with. It doesn't work to control our water, right? Who can make it rain right now? I can't.
Yeah. So one of the things kind of somebody brought up here is that, we have seen, some changes. Somebody brought up the filter strip. So we've seen, some of that go in. We've seen, over the last, 40 years, terraces and some of those things. How can we, I guess, better talk about where maybe we have seen some successes in implementation that can like spur, like this can actually happen if we do enough of it,
So, in other words, use the
Yeah.
example of where we have gained ground to try
Yeah.
to encourage for the ground. I
Yeah.
feel like we do a lot of that actually.
Okay. Hmm.
I don't feel like I mean, I think so somewhat, again, and I'm trying to represent what I heard when I was out there listening to people. That's some of what's annoying the urban people,
Okay.
is because that's all they hear.
Okay.
Look, we did this was great. But now we have to do this. And they're saying, but we have to have, I don't know, Matt, what's the lowball number for wetlands? How many do we need?
Well, we need millions of acres treated. There we go. Yeah.
Yes, millions of acres treated.
Yeah.
That's a heavy lift.
Hmm.
So I'm not so sure that, I mean, probably one of the biggest challenges is we're trying to change one mine at a time to get what we need is a large scale change. And we're doing it one conversation at a time. That's going to be really slow.
Yeah. And it really
So,
may depend on the audience you're working with, because, so if it may work better, it might work for farmers that, say, well, this is a lot to do. Well, we've done it in certain cases. There are some examples, and then others yeah, just like you said, like, okay, yeah, it's not nearly
and also
enough.
I would say right now, I'm not still sure that farmers are convinced that the water is a big enough problem to change their practices to help mitigate.
Hmm. Hmm.
And part of that challenge, I think, is because we've been coming at it from the direction of soil health.
Yeah. Yeah.
Convinced they need to improve their soil health.
Yeah.
And then we just don't put up with the water.
And I think this is one thing you talked about, was just, the kind of the, you know, practices and dollars for practices, but the people infrastructure that's needed to do some of this, and some of that started to happen, but I think there's, did that come up at all about kind of the people infrastructure side of it, that's needed as well?
They're not even thinking in those
Okay.
terms.
Okay.
I mean, I think to a farmer, I mean, a lot of the farmers who haven't tried to put in a wetland or a bioreactor probably don't even appreciate, like, oh, you got to get a contractor. Well, they would on the bioreactor. I think that's a little bit more familiar to them. But the wetland and what it takes, and it takes a whole lot of people to put in a wetland, right?
Yeah. 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 And there are, some, new efforts going on in that all the time to try to make it more efficient. But I think that what your your efforts at that time last year was that, a lot of people may not know about some of the batch and build efforts or conservation agronomist or those types of things.
Well,
Yeah.
and okay, so I think they just started a new corps, like Peace Corps, but for the United States, right? And it's going to be on climate change, where a bunch of young people are going to be funded. Now, would that work in Iowa to help us get some of these practices in place? Not if they don't have the skill sets, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
can, for some things, you can do, like you can send a new college graduate with who cares what the degree is out to do, like pass in a park and things like that. But to build a wetland, maybe some of the dirt work, like if you're able bodied and like know how to run the equipment,
You'd have to
so
know you'd have to be appropriately trained to run the equipment. So
yeah, so maybe everybody hated student loan forgiveness, but maybe we do student loan forgiveness for some of these engineers and some of these other people we need if they do this work for two or 3 years. I mean, I think the United States has done hard things before. I think we can do it. And honestly, this has to be a dialogue beyond the state of Iowa. If you look at the map of who's contributing to poor water quality in the state, it's the Midwest. Iowa is not alone, and we can't solve it on our own.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not just Iowa that contributes nitrate. We have, our land use and our cropping systems are very similar when we go from Minnesota to Iowa to Illinois to Indiana to Ohio, Wisconsin. As I said yesterday, we have an annual row crop system where once there was a perennial. So,
Right.
okay, let me see. I think that, yeah, I think we got most of, okay, we put the book title, rebrand it. I think that mainly covers most of the, okay, so this is, kind of talks about this one, the impact of, an individual farm change might not be significant, in one. So I guess, it says, will all getting on the same page increase our will?
Well, okay, so I get a quote. I get to do it twice in one day. I
Okay.
get a quote my hero, Jane Goodall. And the one thing she says when she talks to kids, and again, Jane Goodall is the first person to say, if we want better decisions tomorrow when it comes to the environment and conservation, we've got to be talking to kids today. She was actually, I get 4-H decided they should talk to kids, but that was trying to change the adult behavior right there and then. But Jane said, we're going to put these kids in this program called Roots and Shoots, and we're going to give them hope. We're going to they're going to have careers, and we're going to get them as educated as we can. And she's done this globally now. And so she says to the kids that one person has to change their mind. One action matters. And she's empowering these kids, and she's empowering millions of kids to do one thing. And so I think we have to start viewing it that way. Yeah, one farmer making action on their farm is just one farmer. But we have some counties in this state where lots of farmers have made changes and then more farmers in that county. So there are some counties that are better than others. Critical mass is important, but it still starts with one. And we should applaud that effort and then say, who's next and how can we help? And urban, by the way, urban people, whoever, if you're urban out there, do your part. Stop spraying your lawns more than you should. Do not give farmers any reason to think that you are not doing the right thing. Do the right thing. Like I never spray my lawn. I don't care. I love dandelions.
It kind
I
of goes
don't
back.
even fertilize my lawn because I don't want to mow it. Put more prairie patches in your lawns. Urban folks, you can make a difference in so many ways.
Yeah, we all can do a little bit better, right? And I'm thinking about that, like creating some of that awareness. My son is in ninth grade science class, and this whole fall they're doing a project on the Iowa and South Skunk watershed, where they're looking at what practices can be used on that land. So there's going to be I don't know, 300 ninth grade Ames students that are thinking about these issues and trying to better understand it and how it impacts maybe the Ames community and the water quality going into going through Ames in those two rivers.
And I went to the first science fair when they did that for the first time a couple of years ago, and it was amazing to listen to these young people have to tell you what their hypothesis was, tell you their findings. So yeah, we got to do all that end. We have to do everything everything we can think of now and everything we have yet to think about.
Okay.
I mean, we need new ideas.
Yeah. Okay. One last one here. So this one is in those, in the talks, this is kind of getting at the farmer versus non-operating landowner side of things, with, a lot of land being owned by people that, aren't actively involved with the operation. Did the survey respondents talk about that situation at all?
No, and I didn't really ask them.
Okay.
I mean, in the listening sessions, and I even think in our R&Rs, that rarely comes up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and one thing I know from like talking to some of our learning farm leaders, our farmer partners through the years, whether you're renting or whether you have other that's and even if you have like have to talk to 7 or 8 landowners, it doesn't seem to be as big of a problem.
For those for those for those for for those operators that are kind of bought in and they're able to educate their
If it's
their
yeah, I mean,
landowners.
if it's just that you've got a lot of owners because the farm has been divvied up among the family versus farmers who have come in and buying something for an investment. Now in Southern Iowa, I'm going to check that. I did hear about the farmer, the people from outside of the state who own land down there. And they're only for hunting, but they're not managing it. And there was a lot of complaints about that. So in Southern Iowa, you're going to actually hear that more because not only are there distant owners, those distant owners only come once or twice a year so they can hunt.
Mm-hmm.
And then pretty much leave it alone. And I think there's some people who think, well, if you just don't do anything, you'll be fine. And that's not true.
No, you may end up with a lot of red cedar
Goalies
in there
or
or
goalies
yeah,
from
yeah,
rain,
that's right.
just not paying
Yep.
attention.
All right. I think in the interest of time, thank you,
Read the
Jackie,
whole
for
report, plug the
yeah,
report.
yeah. I put a link in there to the story so it's easier to find the report. Again, if you need a CCA CEU, please email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW, at iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today with your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. And tune in next week to learn about pollinators from someone from the Blank Park Zoo. Okay, Jackie, any last comments?
No, just, we're all in this together. So let's see how we can work together.
All right. Thanks so much.